Today we will take a look at AMD's 3000 series CPUs and their performance and music production software. The AMD's high-end workstation CPUs claim to be the best workstation CPUs for large projects and music production and mixing. And the main selling points for Threadripper 3000 is not just their high core count, but also their new platform in the form of TRX40 motherboards, which means that you will have a reliable upgrade path in the future. Which cannot be said about current AMD AM4 platform, which will have another supported generation, and I think that's about it. And for music producers and musicians who use audio interfaces with the Thunderbolt, they actually need a computer that can support Thunderbolt. And AMD platform is actually now so mature that you shouldn't have any problems with that. Thunderbolt is Intel's licensed and certified technology, and actually as of recent it is royalty free. But to actually carry the name Thunderbolt, a company needs to go through certification process. So Thunderbolt in many of these TRX40 motherboards is labeled as PCIe through USB, because that's what it actually is. There's nothing special about Thunderbolt. And for example, in this Gigabyte Designer motherboard, there is a special add-in card that supports Thunderbolt through USB-C ports. On the motherboard there is even special pins for that. You can see this port here called THB_C, which probably stands for Thunderbolt through USB-C. But I guess the actual main selling point for music producers in this generation's Threadripper is the reduced latency. Because in this generation Threadripper is using a different chiplet topography, where each of these so-called CCDs have equal access to memory. So if we would look at a situation where we only have 2 of these 8-core CCDs, that would be practically the same as having the mainstream 3950X AMD CPU. And then there you would have the same latency as well. Currently there is still some latency between the 2 4-core modules inside of the CCD, called the CCXs. But in the next generation there have been some very sufficient leaks showing that the actual CCXs will be merged and they will have the shared cache, which will reduce the latency, and that is another good reason to invest in this platform. One negative thing maybe can be added for the higher core count CPUs is that, for example, there have been reports that the 32-core CPUs and 64-core CPUs of Threadripper performed almost identically in Reaper, and that is probably lack of software optimization, and maybe will be solved in software updates soon. But maybe if we compare the Threadripper chips to the HEDT CPUs from Intel, maybe it's not quite fair comparison, because Intel CPUs, they top out at 18 cores, where Threadripper begins at 24 cores. Maybe it would be a lot better and fair comparison if we would take Xeons that are used in actual workstations and compare those with Threadripper. For example, the new CPU that is used in the Apple's Mac Pro. But the problem there is that at least that CPU which is used in Mac Pro is more of a classical Xeon, which is optimized for power per watt performance, not necessarily raw performance. For example, that overclockable Xeon which was presented by Intel that could reach 5 GHz. Intel chips can still win where their higher frequency and lower latency matters more, like in these DAW polyphonic tests. But even in these tests, if we would take the 64-core Threadripper, there would be nothing that could stand against it. And for those who would like to use logic as their main DAW, Hackintosh with AMD CPU becomes more and more attractive option because of the Intel CPU stagnation and better price to performance ratio. There are many guides on how to set up Hackintosh or even virtualize Mac OS on Windows or Linux with VMware, VirtualBox or other software. We can see that in many productivity tasks, Threadripper wins by a landslide. But of course it has an unfair advantage of being on 7 nanometers. As mobile device world is really pushing TSMC to optimize their manufacturing for lower power consumption, they are really quick for shrinking their nodes. So the conclusion is that for large complicated projects and other tasks running in the background, AMD's Threadripper 3000 series CPUs would probably be the best purchasing option for now, as its platform is already mature.